Now, from the Pope John Paul II Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome to The World Over Live. We've got some great guests for you tonight. Coming up later, you know him, you love him. Father George Rutler joins us to talk about dead people he's known. I'm not kidding. His book, Cloud of Witnesses, Dead People I Knew When They Were Alive, contains Father Rutler's remembrances of friends and acquaintances. You'll recognize quite a few of them. Later in the program, our summer reading series continues with an encore of my interview with novelist Ron Hansen. We've got lots to get to, but first, here's tonight's Vaticano.
On the feast day of Saints Peter and Paul, Pope Benedict XVI spoke of the freedom of the Church, both historically and spiritually, celebrating Mass in St. Peter's Basilica and imposing the pallium on 38 metropolitan bishops in a sign of unity with the Pope. The Holy Father said that selfishness, vanity, pride, attachment to money, all these can contaminate the Christian community. But God offers a guarantee of freedom to the Church, freedom from both material bonds that hinder its mission, as well as from spiritual and moral evils that damage its authenticity and credibility. On a historical level, unity with the Apostolic See guarantees churches and bishops' conferences freedom with regard to local, national, and supernatural national powers that can in some case hamper the mission of the Church. Peter's ministry is a guarantee of freedom in the sense of adherence to the truth, to authentic tradition, so that the people of God are preserved from errors concerning faith and morals. The Holy Father then stressed how the powers of evil will never prevail over the Church. One of the typical effects of the action of evil is division within the Church community. Divisions are symptoms of the power of sin that continues to play a part in members of the Church, even after the redemption. But Christ's word is clear. The power of evil will never prevail. During the Angelus address, the Pope thanked the delegation from the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople for its presence. The Pope spoke of how Peter and Paul received different commissions and charisms from God, but both founded one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, which is open to missionary and ecumenical dimensions. On Monday afternoon, the Holy Father celebrated Vespers in the Basilica of St. Paul's outside the walls and recalled the missionary sensitivity of Pope Paul VI and the work of Pope John Paul II for the new evangelization.
In questa prospettiva ho deciso
I have decided to create a new organization, a new pontifical council, with the aim of promoting renewed evangelization in countries where the first announcement of the gospel is experiencing a progressive secularization, and where the meaning of God has been eclipsed. We must face the challenge to find adequate means to repropose the truth of the gospel of Christ. It's important to participate in the public debate through respectful dialogue with other elements of society, This was the invitation that the Pope made to the bishops of England and Wales when he received them on their ad limina visit in the Vatican, led by the Archbishop of Westminster and President of the Bishops' Conference, Vincent Nichols. It was an invitation so that the loyalty to the gospel doesn't restrict the freedom of others, said the Pope, especially like in a country as important as Great Britain.
Yet, as you have rightly pointed out, the effect of some of the legislation designed to achieve this goal has been to impose unjust limitations on the freedom of religious communities to act in accordance with their beliefs. In some respects, it actually violates the natural law upon which the equality of all human beings is grounded and by which it is guaranteed. I urge you, as pastors, to ensure that the Church's moral teaching be always presented in its entirety and convincingly defended.
Archbishop Vincent Nichols explained that beyond the Channel there was debate regarding Catholic agencies that deal with adoption and their freedom to act in accordance with the teachings of the Church on life, family and traditional marriage.
At the moment we are engaged with the British government in serious negotiations about certain aspects of the Equality Bill, which brings together all the previous equality legislation. In particular, we need the space in order to be faithful to ourselves in playing a part in English society. So there's a question of freedom of religious life, not just freedom of religious worship, but the freedom of religious faiths to contribute to a secular and modern society.
In an era marked by secularization, the Pope said there are signs of a strong faith among the Catholics of England and Wales. He spoke about the importance of ecumenical and interfaith relations given the different demographic profile of the population. He spoke especially about relations with the Anglican Communion in light of the recent document in that regard.
I would ask you to be generous in implementing the provisions of the Apostolic Constitution Anglicanorum Cetibus, so as to assist those groups of Anglicans who wish to enter into full communion with the Catholic Church. I am convinced that if given a warm and open-hearted welcome, such groups will be a blessing for the entire Church.
A church that celebrates the visit of the Pope to Britain in September this year. Benedict XVI will be returning to where John Paul II became a witness of the faith. The Pope also spoke about Henry Newman at the audience with the bishops.
We are very excited to hear the Holy Father say that he is going to come. And we are very grateful to the Queen and to the government who have extended this invitation to the Holy Father. And we work closely with the government now and the preparations. We believe that the message of the Holy Father will be warmly welcomed in England and in fact will be something that everybody can attend to and draw strength and encouragement.
When we return, Father George Rutler reflects on some of the more remarkable characters he's had the pleasure of knowing. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay with us.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
My first guest tonight is well known to EWTN viewers. For over 20 years, he's hosted numerous series on the network and is the pastor of the Church of Our Savior on Park Avenue in New York City. He's also authored numerous books, the latest being Cloud of Witnesses, Dead People I Knew When They Were Alive. It's a collection of remembrances about the many unforgettable people he's encountered in his life. The list is as varied and multifaceted as the author's sparkling insights. Here to discuss the book, joining us from New York, is Father George William Rutler. Father Rutler, thanks for being with us.
It's good to be with you, Raymond.
Let's talk about this title before we move on. Cloud of Witnesses, I get that. But Dead People I Knew When They Were Alive? Where'd you come up with this subtitle?
Well, I took the scriptural line. I saw a cloud of witnesses. That was the original title, but people were asking me before it was published what it was about. And I just said, well, I guess I could just simply say it's about dead people I knew when they were alive. So then everybody said, well, why don't you call it that? I thought it was maybe not quite dignified enough, but everybody agreed it was fine. And so that's what it is. It's about people I've known who were very, very much alive and affect my life. But I had 50. I cut it off after I did 50. I could have gone on and on, but by the time it was all wrapped up for the publisher, about 6 more close friends had died. So there are 56. This proves my theory, that there are more dead people now than there used to be.
Father, why do a collection like this? Why is a collection like this instructive and indeed necessary for us?
Well, I mean, our Lord died for us. Every soul is worth the universe. Thomas Aquinas, John Henry Newman, these great intellects, one after another, have basically said the same thing, that every human life is in the image of God and is of inestimable value, and we learn about God through people. History is biography. There are economic views of history, political views of history, but we'll only understand the human drama by understanding humans. And the more we pay attention to people, the more we understand ourselves. The problem is we don't pay enough attention to other people. I live in a very busy city. I live right in the heart of Manhattan, and millions of people live literally within walking, or commute within walking bounds of my parish, and it's very easy to not pay attention, to look upon people like ants. But everybody's a universe unto himself, and no two people are alike. This is the most amazing thing. God in his infinite, I guess we could call it imagination, made everything unique. And no two people are alike.
You certainly see it in the varied characters that you have painted here and that you've captured. Friends, some of these people acquaintances, and they really come to life. Go ahead, finish your anecdote about Victor Borge.
Well, no, he just said, if I remember correctly, he said his father and uncle were identical twins, but he never knew which was the identical one. But even identical twins, are different. Everybody's a character. The word we use, character, is really a Greek word, and it means an instrument with which you chisel something, you engrave something. And everybody is engraved by the hand of God in a different way. And the more we pay attention to that, the more we begin to appreciate the mystery of the soul. Albert Einstein said that he wasn't all that smarter than some other people, he said, but he paid more attention. And consider the great Scottish scientist Sir Alexander Fleming, who discovered penicillin. Well, he noticed one day the mold and the effect it had on bacteria, and this has been going on for millions of years, I suppose, but he paid attention to it. In a parish, when a pastor has contact with thousands and thousands of people, and it's the most wonderful gift to have access to so many souls, and it enriches one, because other people engrave themselves on you. Everybody is the product of other people, because we're the product of our mothers and fathers. But all the people who pass through our lives leave a mark on us, for good or bad. But if we're willing to learn from other people, we become infinitely richer. one reason I wrote this book was that it was a kind of celebration of the priesthood. Everybody deals with it, people, of course, but the priesthood gives you access to a diversity of people such as no other kind of work in the world. And this past year was a holy year, a special year for priests, and that's why one thing I wanted to emphasize: the great gift that God gives priests, being able to shape other people's lives and be shaped by them.
Father, relative to that, I want to talk about, you mentioned in the book, and this is something I didn't realize, that you had given our mutual friend, Father Richard John Newhouse, his final last rites, and of course you knew him over a long period of time. There's a great little anecdote you relate in your impression sketch of Father Richard, and you talk about the fact that he did not like that word converted or convert. Can you tell us that story?
Well, his point was that if you're baptized, if you're not a Catholic, if you're baptized, you're validly baptized, you're baptized into Christ, you receive the grace of Christ. And then if you become a Catholic, you take on the fullness of the truth of the gospel, so that you're not. It's not like converting from unbelief or atheism. But on the other hand, I persisted in saying, yes, but it's a radical change. And he preferred saying, we agreed basically, but we expressed it differently. And he said, no, we embrace the faith. And that's why, in my anecdote I tell, after he had said this, we were passing the building, and he said, there was a lot of construction going on. He said, because they're converting to gas. I said, no, by your logic, they were embracing gas. I do think of one of the great heroes of the faith, John Henry Newman, who said that when he became a Catholic, it was just like coming home. And I think that's what Father Richard was saying as well.
I also want you to touch on Cardinal Avery Dulles, who I know is a friend of yours, who I interviewed many times over the years. I didn't realize that he had inspired you to write a book on the history of hymns and a subsequent series on EWTN. How did that come about?
I attended one of his lectures in which he quoted an old Protestant hymn. He had been brought up Presbyterian, and I was brought up Anglican or Episcopalian. Each one considers the other one a little lacking, but we had that common heritage of hymn singing. The fact is that many of those old evangelical hymns had far more solid Christian dogma in them than a lot of the tripe we have to sing in Catholic churches today. We got talking about it, and he sent me a little history of the book of the hymn we had been discussing, and that got me going. Because just as writing about people opens to us the mysteries of the faith, so does the stories behind these hymns. We have to remember that hymns consist of words and music. People write the music, people write the words. What's the story? What inspired them to do that? So that's why I wrote that book, Brightest and Best, a few years ago. Some of my favorite hymns. I was a choir boy. I was an Anglican choir boy. And we used to know those hymns by heart. And the choir master would just give the number, and we knew exactly. 266 was Dyke's Holy, 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 things like that. 393, Faber, Faith of Our Fathers. And the hymns themselves are sort of walking catechisms. St. Augustine at least is believed to have said that he who sings prays twice. By the way, I called that Brightest and Best because that was the opening line of a hymn by a very famous early 19th century Anglican missionary bishop, and it's often misquoted as Best and Brightest, which really doesn't ring as well. And there was a political novel later on that used that title, but he got it backwards. It's properly Brightest and Best. It's an epiphany hymn. Brightest and best of the sons of the morning, dawn on our vision, lighten our and give light to our eyes.
Father, one of the things that surprised me is your acquaintance with the romance writer Barbara Cartland. Tell us about this. How did you come to meet Barbara Cartland?
Well, I was doing a documentary in London, and a friend asked me if I would deliver some eyelashes to her. She was very famous for wearing big eyelashes. She was always made up that way. That's how we got to know each other. We struck up a good friendship. She was about, 40, 50 years older than I. She was almost 100 when she died.
That's right.
And she's in the Guinness Book of Records. She sold about 1 billion books. And never a dull moment in conversation with her. So
I'll bet.
Now, today, I was doing my parish rounds, taking communion to some people shut in, and a very dear friend of mine, 2 weeks ago, celebrated her 105th birthday. She is extremely lively, extremely sharp. She doesn't even use reading glasses or a hearing aid. She has difficulty walking now. It's such a gift talking to someone like that. She told me today that her first communion was 98 years ago.
Wow.
But I think the one thing that keeps her so alert is that she's always reading late. She's keeping up on things. She's not dwelling on the past. And she's rather surprised that people are interested to hear her stories. So I really have to pry the past out of her. But as a priest, I will visit her and an hour later baptize an 8-10-day-old baby. 105 years old and 8-10 days old. Again, this is the drama of life. And whenever I was with Barbara, Dame Barbara, she was always celebrating this gift. She was always fascinated in other people, and she had her own understanding of God. She didn't get things completely right. But as a romance novelist, she understood that all life is not only a gift from God, but it's an opening into something much greater than we experience.
No, Father, reading this book, I think those who enjoy you via EWTN and enjoy your writings will certainly come, I think, to a deeper appreciation and understanding of you as well. Because, as you say, these are lives that shaped your own. And they all leave their mark and leave impressions, I think. And that's true of all of us. But one sees in this collection Robert Frost and Cardinal Terence Cook and Bill Buckley, all of these influences that, one can intuit and feel through your own work and your own expressions. Do you have a sense of that, or did you, when you completed this work, about the exact lessons and marks and nudgings that these individuals gave to you?
I always had a reverence for my teachers. I vividly remember my kindergarten teacher and my first grade teacher, teaching me how to read. Actually, I could read it a little before then. I was a bit precocious, but I've always, in fact, as a child, we were supposed to stand up when the teacher came into the room, and there is that rabbinical sense that the wisdom of God, the Word of God, is being passed on through these people. We must always revere what they've given us. And as people grow in the life of grace, one thing I've observed is that the more supernatural they become, the more natural they are. Thomas Aquinas says that grace does not destroy nature, but perfects it. And the more, a psychologist would say, an integrated personality, but the church understands saints as somebody through whom Christ is living to the full, and bringing out all the virtues to an heroic degree. And the more people are like that, the more simple they are, the more transparent they are. Sin makes people artificial. And the more people move away from God, the more they do their own will instead of God's will, the more preoccupied they are with themselves and wondering what other people think of them, the impression they're making on other people. And they deprive themselves of the impression that other people make on them. But Mother Teresa of Calcutta, so transparently holy, was so... when you met her, when you were with her, you would have thought you were the only person in her life. And she never had any kind of veneer at all. What you saw, you saw what was there, and nothing artificial.
Yeah. Father Rutler, before we go, the Pope is making an historic trip to the UK this fall. Your thoughts on that visit and how that might impact the very tenuous relations now between the Anglican Church and the Roman Catholic Church?
Well, history will understand this Pope's gifts in many ways. Rarely in the history of the papacy have we had a man with such a mind. I think of maybe Sylvester II and Gregory the Great. You have to go back a long time. But he will also be known, certainly, as the Pope of Christian unity, because he knows that unity is born of truth. The unity of the Church is based on the truth of Christ. It's not... Unity in the Church is not a confederation, an amalgamation. It's an agreement on truth. And he speaks the truth very clearly, and in this approach now, this... apostolic constitution which he's given the Church, he's invited specifically Anglicans to embrace the fullness of the faith while maintaining their own patrimony, their own traditions, their own heritage, the way the Church has done in many, many ways in the past.
Sure.
But he doesn't mince words. He's not in any way compromising the fact that the fullness of the truth is found in the Catholic faith. So the Anglicans are coming from what really is not a church, but an ecclesial community, as the Catholic Church has made very clear. But this is an extraordinarily generous opening, and he is speaking as the shepherd and as the father of faith. And I think one has to be very deeply moved by the fact that he's gone to this great length. But he's doing exactly what Jesus told the first pope. He said to Peter, confirm the people in faith.
Very good. Well, Father, you have confirmed us in faith, and this book is really fantastic. It's not only an enjoyable read, it brings so many personalities that you've known or would have liked to know up close in such a powerful way. Cloud of Witnesses, Dead People I Knew When They Were Alive, is available at bookstores everywhere and through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Father Rutler, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Raymond.
When we return, Catholic novelist Ron Hansen, our World Over summer reading series continues. We'll be back in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Our next guest is one of my favorite novelists. He's the Gerard Manley Hopkins Professor in the Arts and Humanities at Santa Clara University in California. He's written some unforgettable books, which include Mariette in Ecstasy, Atticus, and the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. He joined me on The World Over several years ago to discuss his career, writing fiction, and his faith. The World Over Summer Reading Series continues with Ron Hansen. Take a look. I want to start with the most obvious question. You have distinguished yourself and are an admittedly Catholic writer. What distinguishes you from your peers?
You mean as Catholics or as a novelist?
As a Catholic writer.
I think the key thing is inhabiting your let me get
Start
back
again.
up here.
Okay.
Having your characters inhabit a world in which spirituality is possible. There are questions of God are possible. I think I try to present my characters with moral choices in my fictions. A lot of people do that, but with not so overt a Catholic message.
But you do. You also focus on, in one of the articles I recently read that you wrote, you do also try to create a real world, a
Right.
grounded universe. How difficult is that when you're trying to impart these unseen values?
Well, that is the real world as far as we're concerned. You know, in fact, it always seemed artificial to me that people do not pray in a lot of fiction, or they do not have some kind of wonder about the supernatural, because most people, when I even talk to them in bars, they have these questions. So the fact that fiction is staying clear of it seems to me artificial.
Yeah.
I think that these are the most interesting questions for a lot of people, and I think it empowers your fiction to be much bigger than it would normally be.
And it certainly adds to the thrill, and there's real conflict, because they're moral conflicts. They're deeper than just plot point A to plot point B.
Right.
Are you at all concerned being labeled a Catholic author? Do you feel some weight from this culture as a result of that?
I think one of the things you worry about is being pigeonholed in such a way that others will stay clear of you.
Right.
That you end up preaching to the choir. I want to reach a lot of people and acquaint them with Catholicism, but almost in an analogous way, so that a person who is Jewish would say, oh yeah, I feel about God in the same way. That we'd find much more in common rather than more reasons for division.
Now, some would say, and I can hear them now, you're a Catholic novelist, but being a Catholic, you've got all this rigid dogma hanging around and these very firm ancient doctrines and practices. Doesn't that limit your ability to really see the whole world? Doesn't that limit your vision?
I think as a writer, I draw more resources from the life of Christ and the idea of Jesus as a person who was a storyteller, who spoke to the people in parables. And he wasn't ever talking about dogma. He was just talking about the ordinary life of people and how they can live a better life, or how they can be more connected with God. And I think dogma never enters my mind when I'm writing about these experiences of people I'm writing about.
Because you're stuck in that. You're so immersed in their world.
Yes, and dogma in Rome doesn't enter into most people's consciousnesses, I don't think. But the Mass is important to them. The rituals, the liturgies, the symbols of Catholicism are important and vital to a lot of people.
And they adhere to the rest of it as they go, as it plays out in their lives.
Yeah, the idea of
it is the practices that we are first attracted to,
right,
and the things we can.
And fiction tries to do the same thing that the Mass does, which is present an experience of God, show how God is present in all of creation, animating it, giving it goodness and value. And the best of fiction presents the kinds of metaphors that the Mass does.
You mentioned, somewhere I read, you said that the Mass and attending the Mass was part of your call to being a fiction writer. Tell us about that moment and how it has deepened your work.
Well, one of the things I was considering is my first experience of reading and understanding what people were reading, and that happened at a Mass, and hearing the same stories repeated over and over again, which was like having a storybook open to you over and over again as a young child, and realizing that I understood this story finally, and that I'd heard it before, and that all these people were paying attention to it, that there was something that even adults could find. that was of incredible value and brought them back Sunday after Sunday. And that opened up to me the whole idea of all these paintings and statues were doing. We're creating these stories so that we could live an experience that was 2,000 years distant from us.
Do you feel there's a deprivation in our culture today and in our church because there has been this artistic minimalism, or it's flip side, the kind of kitschy, obvious art?
Right. I think there's a real sterility in a lot of churches these days. I understand the whole idea of the liturgists that you want to have a sense of the people
Focusing
being the church,
on
and so there's much more of a sense of a social hall. But the idea of the stories of the Bible being taught visually is kind of missing in a lot of our churches. I wish we had great artists who would go back and make murals.
Assuming that we are living, and I've heard it described before by the Pope and others, as a culture of disbelief, how does a believing writer engage a culture of disbelief? How do you do it?
I think what you try and do is show the similarities in your experience and the similarities in others, and show that there's just a slight disconnect, and that I'm calling it an experience of God, and they're calling it an experience of maybe coincidence or just a happenstance. That a lot of the things that we find underneath the surface as a kind of a subterranean animating principle, these people find as well, but they're calling it by another name. I saw a man the other day who said, I'm a man of faith. I have faith that you understand what I'm saying. And that kind of connection between human beings was his faith, but it's another way of wording it. And I think what a Catholic writer has to do is widen that category and see all the ways in which these people have been touched by God in their lives, but maybe didn't recognize it by that name.
And seeing the beautiful thing you do in all of your work is show us real people in this real circumstance, but there is always that I'll call it almost a ghosting of grace, of temptation about them. And these forces are always present, but you almost can never put your finger on it as a reader. Right. I told you the other day, it's almost as if after you finish the chapter, you go, wait a minute. And you have to go back to find it, but there is that sense. How calculated is that? How hard do you work at that submerging, that ghosting, if you will, these Catholic themes, this tension between good and evil?
In some ways, it's just being true to yourself, that you present the world as you experience it and recognize that beneath the surface there always was God, or some kind of sense of questions of faith and love and hope. So I don't deliberately try and hide these things. I just pull the tissue away that is there little by little. And what we not find in the greatest films even is the sense that it haunts you. You finish it because it was powerfully moving, and sometimes I've had that experience of really disliking a film and then 2 weeks later saying I can't go back and see that again. Whereas with cheap films and cheap fiction, what you do is it's satisfying immediately, but then it's kind of like cotton candy. You realize it wasn't nourishing, and
it doesn't linger.
No, because the people aren't talking about the deep issues. The idea is, I think, to present the difficulties of life really on the surface. Maybe you don't have the conclusion for them, but at least you're presenting them, and that's what haunts people, and they essentially become the co-creators of that of the piece of literature that they're reading.
You have described what you do, the act of writing, as a sacrament, which strikes some as, what is he talking about? What are you talking about?
Well, I go back to the old catechism definition of a sacrament being a visible sign of an invisible grace. So it's a witness to what you've experienced in life, how God has been present to you. So a woman nursing a baby can be sacramental in many ways because it reminds you of the Pietà maybe, or of God's nurturing of us. There are an awful lot of ways in which it can work for people. I know people have talked about fiction or poetry that they read as a form of prayer. So it is a graced occasion for them, and that's what all sacraments intend to do.
And is this a type of prayer for you? The act, is it spiritually enriching for you?
It is. When I'm writing well, it feels like that. Otherwise, it feels like I've been toying with the devil. But I think the going in there and just doing the work gives me pleasure. And for me, it is a kind of prayer. It's a kind of way of honoring God, worshiping.
Where do you start? I guess that's the question a lot of people have. Where do you begin? Where does this tickle begin that you must write?
Well, often it begins with just hearing something that I want to tell myself, or having read something that incites some questions in my mind, and I might carry it around with me for a while, and then something else comes in. There's kind of a chemical reaction, and I realize I feel compelled to put this down on paper. So in some ways it feels like a compulsion, but there's also sometimes of a feeling like I should be writing something, and it's just like exercising. You kind of feel loggy or something, so you have to get out and run. And the same thing happens with writing. After a while of not writing, I feel kind of ill, so I have to do it.
Do you feel less connected to essays, to nonfiction than fiction?
Yeah, fiction, I think, is the important thing. I don't know why. I like writing essays, but the idea of metaphor is really important to me.
That veiling.
Yeah.
The veiling is important, and the indirection.
And to actually live in somebody else's shoes for a while, it's what compels people to be actors. It's to adopt a persona and see what that life would be like.
I recently read a short story you wrote in Harper's, My Communist, it was called. It was very interesting, about a Polish priest sent to America because he was on a communist hit list. Right. Where was the genesis for that?
I was living in California and went to a mass, and there was a Polish priest there. This was back in the early 80s, and he talked about being sent from Poland, and after a while he realized he was being followed by what was clearly a communist spy. And at first he felt threatened, then he found it kind of enjoyable to have him around, would even wave to him at times. And then the spy just disappeared, and he realized that he missed having that man around, because he realized it was the only person in that neighborhood who could speak Polish the way he did. And I carried that story with me for a long time, too. I had no idea. I wanted to write it down, but I didn't know where to go with it.
Did you take notes? I mean, did you note it down?
I just put it in my mind.
How do you do that? See, I don't remember anything.
I expect my memory to be a good editor.
Yeah, see, I figure I'll just check the tape later. That's the problem.
Well, yeah, it was. I think that's part of it. That you feel, for some reason, that stuck to me, and so I didn't have to write it down. I felt compelled, and then I came across this writing of a Polish priest who went as a missionary to Alaska, and it was written in his broken English, and he had said in there, in the first sign, "I'm conscious of my lacks at English. You'll please correct my errors." And that was the first sentence of my story. I just kind of imitated his way of speaking, and that brought it to life. I felt I knew that man after that point. And then the story I wrote very quickly.
And it's very compelling. Let's talk for a moment about why story. What is it that we crave? What do we need from stories that we can't get anywhere else?
It's the same thing we get from dreams. Virtually all of us dream, even if we don't consider ourselves fiction writers or poets or filmmakers. Right. We have these very active films going on in our minds almost every night. And it's a way, and it's almost never on the nose. It's always about, maybe it's somebody else carrying out somebody else's part. And maybe the issues aren't at the forefront, but there's kind of a pun in your dream that reminds you of what it's all about. And this is our way of freeing ourselves, escaping, maybe even rehearsing problems that we have. It's like the experiments they used to have with cats. They found that even if they didn't go hunting for mice, they would rehearse those actions in their dreams at night when they're sleeping.
And it brings coherency, sense to life?
It's a way of fiction tries to do what dreams don't do, which is to do the same kinds of wild imaginings, but bring them in a sense of harmony and symmetry and order, so that the chaotic moments of our life suddenly seem like they have a purpose and a meaning.
Your process. This is always, I imagine some of us believe there's some pot of spells you mix up and pour onto the page, and it all happens. Do you write every day?
I try to. Sometimes when I'm teaching, I have to wait until the end of the teaching day to get anything done, and sometimes I don't get anything done.
Do you find it's hard the later you try to start?
Yes. I think it's better for me if I write in the mornings, and then sometimes I usually break it up. I start usually around 8 o'clock, go to about 11:30, then I go to Mass, then I go work out, and then I start again around 3 o'clock, and then it feels like a new day. And 3 to 6 are usually pretty good for me, and then I usually break for the entire day.
So do you have a page count you try to write every day? No. Whatever's there?
I'd really be depressed if I did that. So sometimes I'm just content with a good sentence or two.
Okay.
Sometimes it goes very fast.
Words.
But
really?
Yeah, it's very uneven. The earlier on in the book, it's a real struggle just to get to know the characters. Later on, I'll finish many more pages. In fact, a lot of times I feel like my books have really been written in the last 3 months but all the year that goes on before that is just trying to figure out who is who these people are.
So my guess is you don't chart everything out. You don't do character pages. You don't do outlines, or do you?
I do very vague outlines. I always know what the ending is going to be, and I know what the beginning is going to be, and I know various stages that have to be hit along the way. And then as I get to each stage, then I'll kind of do a mini outline of that, what has to be done. And it's mostly, maybe 5 points that I have to hit in order to communicate what I want to get as the ending.
So
you go like that. Yeah.
So you do it. It's kind of as you go along. You do.
It's not a rigid outline at all. And but I do, in terms of characterizations, I often have. I cast my novel. I have pictures in mind of what these people look like, and so I'll just clip them out of magazines or something.
And paste them in the books.
And I'll often have pictures of the region that they're going to be in, maybe maps, lots of reminders. And sometimes I even have kind of character keys where the color of their eyes, just so I don't make kinds of mistakes that copy editors come back and correct.
And bite you on.
Exactly.
Thematically, you have such strong themes in these books. Crime Doesn't Pay and Desperados. In Marriott Next to see this, or Atticus, the prodigal son, really being the linchpin here. How conscious are you of that in the outlining stage at the beginning?
I think that's what compels me to write this story. Initially, when I was writing Mariette in Ecstasy, I was talking about a young woman's ardent love affair with God and how that is kind of actualized or made tangible in the stigmata, and how under investigation hostilities come up in the convent trying to decide whether she's the real thing or not. With Hitler's Niece, I did the flip side of a young woman who's being seduced by evil. Her uncle, who flatters her, gives her dresses, all kinds of wonderful things, and so she's naturally drawn in. She finds it alluring. But at the same time, she learns more and more about this man and what a hateful person he is, and tries to break free, and that leads to her downfall.
You said somewhere, I do not know what I think until I see what I say.
That's an old saying by somebody else I copied from him. Yeah, but I think that's a lot of times. Like I have these amorphous concepts, and when I finally have to address them by writing them down, it makes it much more clear for me, because a different part of my brain is actualized. The reasoning part meets the creative part, and they come up with the solution.
A lot of revision?
Yes, constantly revising.
Painful process.
Yeah, sometimes. I just activate a different part of my brain. The one that is always criticizing me comes into the fore.
In Marriott and Ecstasy, you consulted, I believe, over 100 sources. From Therese's diaries to Emmerich's writings. I mean, you really crossed the
I went to the BX section of the library and read everything there.
Everything there. How long do you limit yourself in that? Because you can really get bogged down in the research period. Or do you set limits?
I read enough until I feel like I know something about the characters, and then at some point I get so antsy I just have to start writing. But some research has to go on beforehand. But then I continue the research as I go on.
With copious notes, or you just digest it all?
Digest it all, mostly. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
God, to have your memory. T.S. Eliot, you quote in Stay Against Confusion, the process of an artist is continual self-sacrifice, a continual extinction of personality. How do you accomplish that?
I think it's the same thing an actor does. You say, what would this character be feeling in these circumstances? How would this person live a life? It's the challenge, but also the joy of the job is living somebody else's life. So it is, and obviously there's going to be lots of elements of your own life that come into your other fictional characters, but to not write autobiographically for me is very freeing. I don't have to worry about stepping on people's toes. I mean, there's my sisters, my mother, my father, my brother are all in my work, and yet in a very subliminal way almost. You can't see them. They wouldn't recognize themselves, but things that they've said and done certainly influence my choice of material and how I write about it.
I think the amazing thing about your writing, and perhaps its curse, is you don't fall into a mannerism. There is no manner in your style. I've read it very closely and gone back and cross-checked. I mean, you're writing about in the voice of a dog, and then you're writing, then you're with Hitler and his niece, and then your whole Western Desperados is this Western landscape with this kind of salty, earthy language. How do you accomplish that? Do you read? I imagine you research writings of that period or in that style and allow that to sort of bleed in. And is that a liability?
It's a liability maybe in terms of your audience, because they never know. I'm unpredictable. They might, if they liked one book, they might dislike the next, and vice versa. In fact, I might have lost people with some books and they've never discovered the other ones. But it's an advantage for me, because the harder I have to work as a writer, the better it is for the reader. The more I have to imagine, the less they have to imagine. Even though I demand my readers imagine something, or because we're kind of co-creators of this project.
Right.
But I think the strain, the working out of the writer muscle is part of the joy of the process, and also kind of the reward for the readers. It kind of to see, where's this guy going to go next. You know, sort of Laurence Olivier. You know, he acted so many different parts, and whereas a person like Gregory Peck pretty much was stuck in one place.
Gregory Peck, yeah. Jude, you're on The World Over Live. What's your question?
Hi, I'm a amateur fiction writer myself, and I'm also Roman Catholic. And I'm drawn to the concept in Ron's book, A Stay Against Confusion, about the connection between faith and fiction writing. Ron, I was wondering, how does the current situation in the church today affect your writing process, since there's such a close marriage between those two things for you?
I've wondered about that myself. I almost never talk about the situation at hand. I wouldn't talk about the priest scandal right now, but I look for situations that were similar to it maybe in the past. Right now I'm working on something about the Desert Fathers and how they went out to the desert to find spirituality. I think that that's a really important way of going about doing it, is to do it by analogy rather than hitting it right on the nose. Because it always takes a while to digest. Fiction doesn't give immediate answers. It kind of dwells on things, and then the residue, it finds the answer.
Interesting. So it doesn't have a direct impact, though, on your day-to-day work.
It doesn't. It affects me as a person, so I think that inevitably it's going to come in a kind of subterfuge. It's going to be in the fiction, but I'm not going to try and address it.
Try to push it on or force it. Here's an email. Dear World Over Live, I've read in Mariette in Ecstasy, hope I got that right, I've read the book and was delighted to find good fiction from a faith perspective. How do you construct a story expressing deep faith without it becoming moralizing? God bless Father Sean. And then he has a nice little Latin salutation there, too.
Father Sean, I think that is a problem. I think a lot of people have had difficulties with it in the past. A lot of so-called Christian fiction is stuff that has kind of a pat solution to a problem. And I think what you have to do is recognize the honesty, the difficulties in life and the ambiguities of life. And just presenting them, you present what is the Father hears in the confessional, that there's all kinds of ifs, ands, or buts in our lives.
And to push through that reality and live in it.
Yeah, just let it boil to the surface, and don't force the issue by saying the Church has always said, as the conclusion. Just even in dealing with the stigmata, for example, I was dealing with a long history of very ambiguous situations. Nobody's ever been able to prove what was happening or why, and for me to have come in and forced a conclusion would have been really artificial.
One of the things that really stands out in all of your work is your amazing attention to detail. And I know you were a painter. Do you still paint?
Don't. I wish I did.
You don't anymore. Yeah. Well, you paint with your words, certainly.
I do, yeah.
Where did that come from, and how did it inhabit and affect your work?
I think what it is that, as you say, I began as a visual artist, and for me, I have to make the scene real for myself. I have to inhabit that scene. So to do that, I have to see the colors of the dresses and see how the drapes are blowing on the wind. All those things are there to convince me of the reality of what I'm writing about. Otherwise, I would feel distant from it in the same way that a reader would.
Yeah, one of the emails I was reading a moment ago, and accidentally, I think it got killed here, said it was talking about the cornmeal colored floors and great detail, and it's very evocative.
It's trying to get the sensuality of the prose is something I really pay a lot of attention to. So, and I really rejoice whenever I have a good metaphor in there. I kind of run around tickled like Snoopy.
Well, you must rejoice a lot. Here's Susan from Ohio. Susan, you're on The World Over Live. What's your question?
Hi. I think most people who write seriously eventually come to the conclusion that the best way to become a good writer is to become a better reader. So as Catholic writers, whom or what should we be reading for influences?
Any suggestions real quick?
Boy, There's lots. Graham Greene, we were talking about last night. He was a real hero of mine, a wonderful writer. I think Gerard Manley Hopkins is a wonderful poet who you should read. There's so many, it's really hard for me to tell.
Flannery O'Connor.
My wife, Bo Caldwell, she has a novel called The Distant Land of My Father that just came out.
There you go.
So read that. It's a terrific story.
Ron Hansen's latest work, Exiles, is the story of poet Gerard Manley Hopkins commingled with the 1875 shipwreck of the Deutschland that inspired Hopkins' famous poem. It's a lyrical work filled with faith and real majesty. Give it a look. It's Exiles by Ron Hansen. It's available at bookstores everywhere. Until next week, you can find updates and the occasional commentary by following me at Twitter, at twitter.com/Raymond Arroyo, or on my Facebook fan page. Those of you who follow us will not only get previews of upcoming shows, but additional material by our guests. And you can always find me at RaymondArroyo.com. And do you want a great summer read to lift your spirits? The Prayers and Personal Devotions of Mother Angelica is still available at bookstores everywhere. Until next week, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye now.